Hey guys, what's up? Welcome back to another video. Today we are doing a series review. A fun fact, I actually filmed this entire video last night for about 25 minutes, only to realize that the camera was not actually recording. So good times. Here we are again. So without further ado, we're going to be talking about the Plated Prisoner series today. For those of you that are new, welcome to the channel. My name is Jaya. I put out videos every Wednesday and Sunday. We talk all things books here on this channel. So if that sounds like it's your vibe, definitely consider hitting that subscribe button and that notification bell. For those of you who are returning, thank you so much for being here. I appreciate you so much. And it's so lovely to be able to build this reading community with you guys. That being said, let's jump into it. So I just wanted to preface this by saying that the Plated Prisoner series, all the books do build off of each other. So the first book, I'm happy to give spoiler-free reviews. Unfortunately, because of the way that the other books are all interconnected, I do have to share some of the details of what happens in each of the books. So at that point, I will definitely warn you. So if you want to pop off to avoid any kind of spoilers, that would be the time to do it. So first and foremost, let's talk about Gild. Gild is the first book in the Plated Prisoner series, and we're following the story of Midas and Oren. Oren happens to be the gilded pet, or if you will, the saddle, the favored one within Midas's kingdom. Midas is the king of the sixth kingdom. There are 6 kingdoms in total in the world of Auria. There is also brief mentioning of a 7th kingdom that no longer exists, where the Fae were said to have been at some point in time. This area was also known as Anwin. So these are the 2 locations that you'll hear about throughout the course of this series. In this book, you are primarily focusing on Auria and specifically the kingdoms within Auria and Midas's political plays. Midas as a king is shown to be very ruthless, very brutal, cunning. However, he is also described as being loving, caring from Oren's perspective. She believes him to be her protector, the one who cares for her the most, and the one who never, ever will put her at harm's risk. Something happens throughout the course of this book where that belief is shaken. So in order to prove that he still cares about her, he sends her off on a trip where a bunch of craziness ensues. By the end of this book, there are certain things that are revealed that make you think, interesting. Throughout the course of this book, you are also introduced to another character who is Queen Melina. Queen Melina is the actual official wife of Midas. She comes from the Collier line, who is known to be the ruling class of the land they live in, also known as Hybel. So their specific castle is located in Hybel. This also has a very cold, very wintry vibe to it because this particular kingdom is surrounded by snow. Ice, snow, cold, all that goodness. And then you have gilded gold all across the kingdom because the actual castle has been gilded by Midas himself, and Oren is the favored one because she is his gilded pet, the only woman that is also of gold skin and gold coloring, which is believed to be Midas's doing. The course of this book was very intriguing. It was fun to read. It definitely sets the pace for the rest of the storyline, and you really get a clear picture of who Oren is. You get a lot of her back history as well in this story, and throughout the course of this novel, you really understand the relationship between Midas and Oren. My thoughts. This was a 3-star read for me. Oren's character really irritated me. I found her a little too submissive. I found her to be a little too damaged in distress kind of vibes. I think the rest of the books slowly show her growth throughout the course of the series, but this book in particular was a 3-star for me. But it's a great introduction story, and you do get a little bit of all the different characters. At the very end of this book, you also get introduced to the main male plot lead character, who is Slade. He shows up for a very brief second, and then the next book kind of picks up from where this book leaves off. At this point, spoilers will start coming out, so this would be a great time to get off if this is all you wanted and you just wanted to get a brief idea of what the series is about. But the story is essentially about Oren and her journey and the 2 different worlds, the human worlds where the Oriens are, and the Fae world, Anwin, and then you have Oren and Slade as your main piece players, and then you have Midas, who is one of the kings, who is also very heavily prominent in this storyline. It's a very well-written story. The stories build upon each other, and it definitely becomes more and more high stakes as the books progress. But that's kind of the vibes of the first one. So spoilers coming at you now. Definitely consider clicking off this video if you don't want any spoilers. So at the end of this book, you do understand that Oren is actually the one with the gold touch, and she was quote unquote rescued by Midas, and that's how she ended up in his kingdom. Up until this point, she truly believes he loves and cares for her, and truly believes that he is there to protect her. So at the end of this book, after everything happens on the pirate ship when they get kidnapped, and now she's also being treated poorly by the other saddles in the book, who are quote unquote the other harem women of King Midas's palace, who have always seen Oren as a threat. They're now in the midst of all this craziness and are under the protection / kidnap of Rip, Commander Rip, who happens to be the primary commander in King Ravenger's court. And King Ravager is known to be a very, very powerful foe because he has magic. One other thing about this series is that each of the different main kings and queens have magical powers that is believed to be passed down from their Fae ancestry, when the humans and the Fae used to be able to interconnect with one another. They used to be able to see one another, and there was a connection between Anwin and Oria. But since that has been stopped, there have been no other Faes. So all of these kings and queens who have magical powers tend to have a little bit more prestige within the course of the storylines. So then we move into Glint. We have Oren having her eyes blown wide open in this book as she's starting to realize that she doesn't have as much freedom as she thought she did, and she doesn't have as much protection as she thought she did. In Glint, you get a little bit more of Oren's history, and you also get to learn more about Slade and his Wraiths. The Wraiths are the people that he considers closest to him, so you're introduced to Lou, Judd, you're also introduced to the cook, who's hilarious. You are also introduced to Ravenger and Riot. Riot is also one of my favorite characters in this book. So throughout the course of this book, you kind of see that Oren is learning the beauty of independence. And even though she is technically a bargaining chip and technically a prisoner in Ravenger's court, she's treated with the utmost respect. And you start seeing a little bit of banter developing between Oren and Ravenger. You get to see a little bit more of her personality starting to come out, and you get to see her kind of building up into a stronger female lead character. You also see a lot of political plays that are happening at this point. So because at this point Oren is gone, Midas is freaking out because obviously his entire gilding power is actually Oren's, and he uses her to make everything gold. He has no powers himself, but he has fooled everyone in order to be the king in his kingdom. So he is doing everything in his power to get Oren back. Now, while he's distracted and out, roaming around the various kingdoms, Melina decides that she's going to do a power play of her own and starts trying to take over Highbell and take the throne for her own, as well as basically garner sympathy for herself and support for herself in her kingdom in a very, very poor manner. So at the end of this book, you have a lot of crazy things that also happen, and Oren ends up back in Midas's clutches, and Melina has basically been forced out of Highbell, and that's kind of where we end up with Glint. Then as we move from Glint into Gleam, this book is a little bit more of Oren coming to terms with what her life actually looks like. At this point, Midas has her back and immediately starts trying to cage her and clip her wings and telling her what she can and cannot do. Now she's tasted a little bit of freedom and she's not ready to jump back into that life. Also, you get to see a lot of power play struggles between Midas and Slade, which is really entertaining to watch. And then of course you have Queen Melina dealing with the after effects of her being a terrible person up until this point, and dealing with the fact that she's been exiled and is now dealing with all the craziness that comes with that. This book, I think, is really when the storyline starts to pick up, and then you kind of have this crazy thing that happens at the end, and then now Oren and Slade are basically running in order to protect themselves. Once you get through Gleam and you get into Glow, Glow is all about recovery from PTSD. At this point, Oren's entire life has been shattered. She has basically had a cloth that's been covering her eyes removed. She realizes all the craziness that's happened around her. The other part about this book that's a lot of fun is you also start getting a little bit of Slade's history and Slade's background. You also get to see where all of his loved ones are. You get to read more about the Fae world in this book, and you get a lot more understanding of the connection between those two realms. You also get a little bit more in terms of the rates, and you also get a lot more in terms of the political plot line that's now happening. There's also another key character that's introduced in this. Her name is Kyla. Kyla is a queen as well, and she is basically angling to become Midas's wife in this book because they have basically declared that Melina is dead. So with this all happening as a whirlwind, she also threatens Oren, not realizing that Oren is the power of Midas. And at the end of this book, everything is kind of in shambles and Oren is obviously on the run. So in this book, Kyla's trying to garner sympathy for herself and is now trying to take over Sixth Kingdom as well. And so she has also convinced all the monarchs that the reason that things happened the way they happened were Oren's fault. And she demands that Slade bring Oren to a conflux in order to be tried for her crimes. So in the midst of all of this, Ravenger doesn't really want to tell her what's going on. He wants to protect her. He also wants Oren to heal and actually deal with all the trauma that she's trying to suppress. So you kind of get to see that aspect of Oren and that slowly changing. You also get to see the storyline of her and one of the saddles that helped her escape and also happens to be threatening her and blackmailing her at the same time. They start forming an interesting relationship as well. So that's also interesting to read. And then throughout the course of this book, you just kind of get to see Oren overcoming all of these difficulties. And right as like she's starting to tap into her power, lo and behold, she gets kidnapped again. Which brings us to Gold. Actually, not quite. So Glow, she's been kidnapped. She's been forced to go back to the conflux. There are basically people telling her that she needs to pay for her actions. So crazy things have happened, and Ravenger, in order to save Oren, rips another hole in the world, allowing her to go back to Anwin, and now they're both trapped in different realms with no ways back to each other. So in Glow, we kind of see Oren going through her PTSD, getting past it and growing. We see Slade and her working together as partners. And then in Gold, you really get to see how they are apart. Slade really does take it upon himself. When he says to her, you know, I would be a villain for you, he really is. He really does everything he can to get her back. And he goes brutally after anyone who has possibly harmed her. And the love in his heart for this woman is phenomenal to see. It's also really interesting to read his reactions and how that's affecting his loved ones around him, specifically his brother, his rates, and his mom, and all this other stuff that you're revealed in the Glow. Then in Gold, you also get a little bit more of Oren coming into her own and also understanding her past and what happened to allow her to be in the human world in the first place. We also get a lot more storyline as to how she's actually Fae herself and how, you know, everyone who believes in her and her family are actually waiting for her return in hopes that they're going to bring a new time and peace into Anwin. You also get to see that throughout the course of this book that there is craziness that's happening in the Fae realm as well. People are being tortured. People are being treated brutally unless they accept the regime of a very, very cruel king. You also get a little bit more perspective of what Slade went through as a child and what he's dealing with. And this book is basically a crazy political campaign that's happening with whirlwinds of insanity happening around every single character. But at the heart of it, it's a romance novel and a romance song between Slade and Oren. And it's just absolutely beautifully written. And then last but not least, you have Goldfinch. So in Goldfinch, you're going to get your conclusion, obviously. Throughout the course of this book, you also see a lot more of Queen Melina in both this book and this book. You start seeing her kind of redeem herself. You also see Queen Kayla kind of having to be forced into making the right decisions for a change. You also get to see a lot of Oren growing into her own power. You get to see Slade and Oren finding each other, manifesting each other. There are dragons in this book. Like, who doesn't love dragons? And then then throughout the course of this book, you also get a lot more conclusions on what's going on, a lot more battle, a lot more war, a lot more high stakes. The way I would describe this is very similar to ACOTAR, the third book, ACOWAR, where you're really getting a lot more political than you are romance, but it is still very well written. The only qualm I had with this book is that the ending felt rushed. So you have a lot of crazy things that have happened. You have a lot of devastation, a lot of like just heart-wrenching moments. And then at the very end, the way that everything ties together happens within like the last 3 chapters, and it happens super duper fast, and it almost seems coincidental. So I did struggle with that just a little bit, but I do think overall the series was very well written. I realized I didn't give any of my star ratings for the other ones, so let's go back and do that. So Guild, as I had mentioned, was a 3-star for me. Glint was also a 3-star just because it's still the beginning of the storyline. You're still getting the history of all the different characters. Then we push into Gleam. Gleam was a little bit better for me. The story did start picking up and you got more interesting twists and turns in the book, but it was still a little bit slow for me, so I would give this one a 3.5. Glow, I think, was a very beautifully written book. You get a lot of character development, a lot of character growth, a lot of more political storyline happening, a lot more character viewpoints that are happening. It's a much faster moving book. I would give this one a 4 stars. Gold, I thought, was quite excellent. This was actually probably one of my favorites in the entirety of the series. This was a solid 4.75 stars for me. And then last but not least, we have Goldfinch, and Goldfinch was about a 4.5 star, only because I wasn't thrilled with the way that the book ended. However, I did enjoy the overall wrapping up the storyline. So altogether, I would say this series was a solid 3.85 to 4-star read for me. I do think it's worth reading. I think if you like books like Fourth Wing, or if you like ACOTAR, any of the Sarah J. Maas books really, and if you like sometimes, you know, morally questionable males, shadow daddies, if you will, Zodiac Academy, like anything along those vibes, you're probably going to like the Plated Prisoner series as well. And I also think it's a great series to start with because it's not hard to understand the worlds. It's introduced very, very slowly and it's written beautifully. So it's very easy to understand the magic systems, the different castles, kingdoms, and the fantasy aspect of these books. And the romance is very high stakes, which makes it more enjoyable and easier to plug into. Overall, I would say that it was really fun to read, and I'm so thankful that my best friend read it with me and is still reading it with me, and very excited to hear her final thoughts as she concludes the 5th and 6th book in this series. And I can honestly say thank you so much for buying it for me for Christmas, Mina. Appreciate it. And that brings me to the end of this video. If you guys like bookish content like this, definitely consider hitting that subscribe button and that notification bell if you have not done so yet. And thank you once again for joining me to talk about these books, regardless of where you are, whether it's morning, evening, or night. Thank you so much. And I can't wait to give you more bookish content soon. Love you guys. See you soon. Bye.